1945. The war is lost. Everyone knows it. The Reich is crumbling from the east and the west. Allied bombers have turned German cities to ash, and the fuel that once powered the greatest armored thrust in history is running dry. And yet, somewhere deep inside a heavily guarded testing facility in Kummersdorf, Germany, a machine sits waiting. A machine so enormous, so catastrophically over-engineered that the ground itself trembles beneath its weight. It weighs as much as 188 family saloon cars stacked together. It is so heavy that every bridge in Europe would simply collapse under it. It cannot cross a river. It cannot use a road without destroying it. It was never fired in anger at a single enemy soldier. And Adolf Hitler personally approved it. This is the Panzerkampfwagen VIII, known to history by one word. Maus? Maus? The name is almost laughable, because there is nothing small about this machine. At almost 188 metric tons, the Maus is the heaviest fully enclosed armored fighting vehicle ever built in the entire history of warfare. Not the heaviest tank of the Second World War. The heaviest tank ever constructed, full stop, to this very day. It dwarfs the Tiger. It makes the King Tiger look modest. It is a monument to one nation's obsession with size, power, and the terrifying belief that if you simply built something big enough, you could not be stopped. But the story of the Maus is not a story of triumph. It is a story of what happens when military ambition completely disconnects from military reality. It is a story of ego, of brilliant engineers given an impossible task, and of a weapon so impractical that it was almost useless before a single one was ever finished. To understand why Germany built the Maus, you have to understand the psychological shock of 1941. Operation Barbarossa had torn into the Soviet Union with devastating speed, and yet almost immediately, German tank crews encountered something that genuinely frightened them. The Soviet T-34, fast sloped armor, a powerful gun, and worse, the KV-1, a Soviet heavy tank that early German anti-tank weapons simply could not penetrate. German shells bounced off. The KV-1 laughed at them. For a military that had dominated armored warfare for 2 years, this was a profound and unsettling revelation. Germany began a desperate race to outgun and out-armor the enemy. The Tiger emerged in 1942, the Panther in 43, the King Tiger in 44, each one heavier, better armored, more powerfully armed than the last. But for certain figures within the German command structure, and most critically for Hitler himself, even these were not enough. There was always a bigger threat on the horizon, always a more powerful Soviet tank rumored to be in development. The response was always the same. Build something heavier. Build something that cannot be destroyed. Enter Ferdinand Porsche. Yes, that Porsche. Before he became synonymous with luxury sports cars, Ferdinand Porsche was one of Germany's most celebrated and controversial automotive engineers. He had a direct line to Hitler, who admired him enormously. And in the middle of the war, Porsche was given a commission that would consume years of effort and resources Germany could not afford to waste. The project began in earnest in 1942. Hitler himself laid out the initial vision during a conference in June of that year. He wanted a tank that could carry an enormous gun, one capable of destroying any enemy vehicle at extreme range, wrapped in armor so thick that nothing the enemy possessed could penetrate it. The specification called for armor 200 millimeters thick on the turret front, For comparison, the Tiger I had 100 millimeters of frontal armor. The Maus would have twice that. In some areas, even more. Porsche's design bureau threw itself into the challenge. The result was a vehicle of almost surreal proportions. The hull alone stretched nearly 10 meters in length. It stood nearly 3.5 meters tall. It was over 3.5 meters wide. Fitting this machine inside a standard railway loading gauge was a structural impossibility without significant modification. Moving it by rail required specially reinforced flat cars. Moving it by road meant destroying the road. To move something this heavy, conventional petrol engines were not enough. The Maus used a diesel-electric drive system, an approach more commonly associated with locomotives than tanks. A large internal combustion engine drove electrical generators, which in turn powered electric motors connected to the tracks. It was an ingenious solution to an insane problem, but it brought its own complications. The system was mechanically complex, difficult to maintain in field conditions, and the engine available to Porsche, a modified Daimler-Benz aircraft engine, was never truly adequate for the weight it was asked to move. Top speed on a flat, hard surface was approximately 20 kilometers per hour. Cross-country, considerably less. The armament, at least, was genuinely formidable. The main gun was the 128mm KWK-44. This was not a weapon designed to damage enemy tanks. It was designed to destroy them absolutely, at ranges that no opponent could return fire effectively. A secondary 75mm coaxial gun sat beside it in the enormous turret capable of engaging lighter targets. In a paper, nothing the Allies or Soviets fielded could survive a direct hit from the 128mm gun. On paper. But there was a problem that no gun could solve. A problem that no amount of armor could protect against. The Maus could not cross a bridge. Not a single standard, military or civilian bridge in Europe could support nearly 188 tons. The engineers knew this from the beginning. Their solution was remarkable in its ingenuity and absurd in its implications. The Maus was designed to wade across rivers along the riverbed, completely submerged, using a snorkel system to supply air to the crew and engine. To make this work, a second Maus would park on the riverbank and supply electrical power through a cable to the submerged vehicle below. The plan required 2 of these colossal machines to be present at every water crossing. In a war where Germany was desperately short of fuel, parts, and manpower, this was not a plan. It was a fantasy. Production was authorized, but only barely. 2 prototype hulls were eventually completed. A total of 150 units had been ordered at various points during the project's lifetime, but reality intervened long before those orders could be fulfilled. The 2 prototypes were designated V1 and V2. Testing began in late 1943 at the Kummersdorf proving grounds, and almost immediately the problems multiplied. The ground beneath the Maus did not merely compress. It gave way. Soft earth, mud, the ordinary terrain of a European battlefield, swallowed the machine. The tracks, nearly a meter wide, distributed the weight as best they could, but nearly 188 tons is nearly 188 tons, and physics does not negotiate. In field conditions, the Maus was not slow. It was effectively immobile in anything that was not solid, flat, and purpose-prepared ground. The V1 hull was tested without a turret initially, using a concrete ballast block of equivalent weight. When the turret was finally fitted to V2 and testing continued into 1944, the mechanical failures came in waves. The drivetrain strained under loads it was never fully engineered to bear. The engine overheated. Components failed with dispiriting regularity. The vehicle that was supposed to be impervious to enemy attack was being defeated, quietly and thoroughly, by its own engineering. And then the war came to Kummersdorf. As Soviet forces advanced into Germany in the spring of 1945, the decision was made to deny the Maus prototypes to the enemy. Both vehicles were destroyed by German forces. V1 was blown up where it sat. V2 suffered a similar fate, though its turret survived relatively intact. Soviet engineers arrived shortly afterward and found what remained. With characteristic thoroughness, they recovered the components, eventually combining the hull of V1 with the turret of V2 to create a single composite vehicle. That reconstructed Maus was transported to the Soviet Union, studied, and ultimately placed on permanent display at the Kubinka Tank Museum outside Moscow, where it remains to this day. It is the only Maus that exists anywhere on Earth. The Maus never fired its gun in combat, not once. It never faced an enemy tank. It never defended a position, crossed a front line, or fulfilled any of the battlefield roles for which it was theoretically designed. Its entire operational history consists of test drives on a proving ground, followed by deliberate destruction. For all the years of engineering effort, for all the resources consumed, for all the personal attention lavished upon it by Hitler and Porsche alike, the Maus achieved precisely nothing of military value. Now consider what it was up against. By the time the Maus was being tested, the Allies were fielding vehicles of a very different philosophy. The American Sherman tank weighed roughly 30 tons. It was not the most powerful tank on the battlefield. It was not the best armored. But it could be produced in enormous numbers. It could cross almost any bridge. It could be transported by standard rail. It could be repaired in the field, and it could be supplied with fuel across vast distances. The Soviets had refined the T-34 into an increasingly capable fighting machine and were producing it at a rate that German industry could not come close to matching. The British Firefly had taken a reliable chassis and fitted it with a gun capable of threatening even the heaviest German armor. Every one of Germany's adversaries had reached the same conclusion, almost independently. A good tank you can build in thousands is worth infinitely more than a perfect tank you cannot build at all. The Maus represented the ultimate expression of German over-engineering, a tendency that ran through much of the Wehrmacht's late-war procurement. The Tiger was mechanically unreliable and expensive to produce. The King Tiger was better armored, but suffered similar logistical nightmares. The Maus simply took every one of these flaws and amplified them to the point of self-parody. It was the logical endpoint of a design philosophy that prioritized individual vehicle supremacy over operational practicality, and by 1944, that philosophy had already lost the war. Why was the Maus forgotten? Partly because it failed so completely that there was nothing heroic to mythologize. The great forgotten machines of history often carry with them some tragedy of near success, some battle where they almost turned the tide. The Maus has no such moment. It has no last stand, no desperate charge, no crew who fought and died inside it. It has test drivers, mechanical reports, and a controlled demolition. Partly also because the victorious powers had little interest in dwelling on weapons that posed no actual threat to them. The Maus was a curiosity, not a danger, and curiosities do not make their way into history books as easily as catastrophes do. But there is another reason. The Maus embarrasses a certain narrative about German engineering. The legend of German technical superiority during the Second World War is persistent and seductive, and the Maus complicates it deeply. Here is the apex of that engineering tradition, the most ambitious armored vehicle ever conceived, and it could not cross a river, could not move through mud, could not be produced in meaningful numbers, and was destroyed by its own operators before the enemy ever reached it. The Maus is not proof of German engineering genius. It is proof of what happens when genius is pointed in entirely the wrong direction. 188 tons of steel, never used, never needed, and ultimately blown apart in a field in Brandenburg. The Maus that could not move. If you want more forgotten war machines pulled from the shadows of history, subscribe to Forgotten War Relics. There are more stories like this one. Most of them are stranger than you think.